hi everybody, and welcome. This is the Product Expert series of webinars that we run here at ProdPad. And joining us today is Kate Leto. We're going to be talking about how to navigate product leadership. So we're going to be talking to her about that. And many of you have been here before. You know that this is a series of webinars that we do. And every time we do it, we always bring in an expert. This is Kate's second time back because she's such an expert. And different focus today, though. But as you know, all the past talks have been recorded. Some of them are presentations. Some of them are fireside chats like we've got today. And it's always with a focus on these experts and their insights, right? The focus on the content, the learning, the experiences, the sharing. So today is going to be recorded. You will get a copy of this recording. You will have a chance to ask questions as well. So thank you all for turning up in person here. Make use of the Q&A to ask your questions and make use of the chat to add your commentary. We'd love to hear from you. So before I kick off and formally introduce Kate, I want to tell you a little bit about what we're working on here at ProdPad. So ProdPad is a tool that was built by myself and my co-founder, Simon Cast, who you also might know as one of my co-founders on the Mind the Product side of things. It's a tool that we built when we were product managers ourselves. We needed a tool to do our jobs, and this thing just didn't exist. We needed something to keep track of our big, messy backlogs and all the experiments we were running and, you know, the overarching objectives that we're supposed to hit. And so ProdPad was something that we built for ourselves internally at first, and it helped us have a sense of control and give some transparency into the product management process. And so today it's being used by thousands of teams around the world as their single source of truth for what the product is made up of and where they're taking things and what decisions have been made. And it's actually a tool that you can try for free. We have a free trial that you can start today, or we have a sandbox mode, which it's basically like a space that you can explore in and play in. It has example data like lean roadmaps and OKRs and feedback and experiments and all sorts of other stuff like that. You can see how it all sort of interconnects and play with it yourself. And really key thing is that our team is made up of product people. So you know us as a couple of the founders behind Mind the Product, but we've got other product people scattered throughout the team as well. And we've got this real mindset of understanding what works for people and adjusting as we go. So we've been iterating on ProdPad for more than a decade now with updates every week. So give it a try and give us feedback. Let us know what's working and what's not working, and we'd love to hear from you. On that note, I wanted to clue you in with something really interesting that we have been working on. As you know, AI has changed the way that we can interact with our apps and with our data. And so we've built this new thing that we're calling an AI coach. And so we didn't just want to build stuff that you can generate. Like you can do that in ProdPad. You can generate ideas and come up and brainstorm user stories and key results. But we also wanted to use AI to act like a coach for you. So you can use it to sense check whether the ideas that you're working on actually match up with your vision. You can use it as a coach on your vision to give you feedback on whether the vision is actually well written or not. You can use it to ask questions about anything that's in your ProdPad backlog. You can say, hey, what are people asking about? Or can you summarize last week's feedback? Or can you tell me if this aligns with that? And it'll know what's in your ProdPad backlog. It'll help you understand what's in there and basically act as your sidekick as you're doing your product management day job. So give that a try. We'd love your feedback on that. Let us know what kind of questions you're asking and what you learn from it. So that's enough about me. Let me introduce you to my good friend, Kate Leto. We were just talking about how long we've known each other. Both of us are transplants to Europe. We both met when we were living and working in London. And we've kind of grown up in the product management sphere. And so, I mean, today, Kate is an experienced exec coach with over 25 years in product management, digital transformation, and leadership development. Her career started from the dot-com era with roles at Yahoo and as an independent consultant for other global corporations. So she's an accredited coach and the author of Hiring Product Managers, Using Product EQ to Go Beyond Culture and Skills. Last time we had Kate on here, she came in to talk about product EQ. And today we're going to be talking about expert skills and coaching as a leader. So with that, I want to say a big hello and thank you to Kate for joining us. Everybody say hi to Kate.
Hello, everybody. So cool to see people from all over the world here. That's great.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm looking forward to diving into this today. I guess really key thing to start with is, you're an expert coach. Do you want to talk us through what you mean by, you're an executive coach. Do you want to talk us through what you mean by executive coaching?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So as an executive coach, I'm going to start by telling you what I don't focus on.
Great.
So
Yes.
what I don't focus on as an executive coach is teaching and training leaders and executives about product management skills. Right. So I'm not the person that's going to come in and help you as a leader or your boss perhaps understand what OKs are and how to implement them. Or teach things like the discovery process and how to
Yeah.
go about that, design sprints, any of that type of stuff. Road mapping. I'm not the coach for that. What
There's
I
other
do,
people who are experts in that.
yeah, and
Exactly.
that's the thing. There are so many people in our world who are great at that. And it's such fundamental part of what we do. We need that. So that's awesome. What I do focus on as an executive coach is helping product leaders develop their leadership skills, right? So it's a different slant. And by leadership skills, I mean, getting comfortable with making big decisions. I mean, having really clear communication and being really bold in that. I mean, helping their team members learn to develop themselves and equip themselves for success. Um, I mean, building influential state relationships with stakeholders. So it's more of that leadership development skill set that I really focus on versus the product skill set.
That's great. That's a really good way to defining it. And so, how did you find yourself in this particular angle?
It's been a journey, right? But
Yeah.
the last time, as you mentioned, the last time I was on, I was talking about product EQ
Yeah.
and the book that I wrote about hiring product managers for looking at their emotional intelligence versus just their product skills and why that was so important. So it really it started with all of that. And it started with um probably in like 2016, 2017. I realized I was doing a lot of product consulting at the time. I was working for large organizations going through digital transformations, and working with VPs and CPOs and heads of product that were trying to help their teams work in a different way and think in a different way. And I realized in those conversations, they might start out with a question about strategy or a question about roadmaps or metrics, but like very quickly it would turn to more of a personal question. You know, why won't my team respond to me? Why is my stakeholder being such a jerk? Why can't we have a good relationship? Is this work even the work I want to be doing with my life? What am I up to? What am I doing? And all of these are really important questions. But as a product consultant, I didn't really feel equipped to answer them.
Yeah.
So that's when I went and started actually taking more formal coaching training on personal and business coaching and what that might be like, not to become a coach at that point, but just to kind of bring that into my skill set as a consultant.
Yeah.
Um, and there's been such a pull with coaching and such a pull into leadership in that space within product. It just kind of naturally evolved from there. And I found that, after being in and around product for 25 years, I was kind of tired of having the same conversations around our skills. And I
Yeah.
felt like at a certain point in our careers, in a product leader's career, you do have that product skill set in place, or how to go figure it out, right?
Yeah.
The people to go talk to, the blogs to go read, the books to get. But no one really focuses on that leadership development aspect within product people. So it just became kind of a natural pull for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good backstory. And I think how a lot of people move their way through into leadership as well is a roundabout way. I'm curious from the people listening in today, who here is a leader already and is in that position. I was going to say is struggling with things there, but that kind of goes without saying because everyone in a leadership position is struggling with something. And who here is on that path, is trying to find their way up to a leadership and wondering what's ahead of them. Would love to hear from people in the audience and throw some thoughts out there. And if anybody has particular challenges, then let us know, and that might be something we can tackle today. But Kate, so probably interesting to ask, like, what sort of leaders do you work for? I mean, are these people who are brand new in leadership, or leaders who are long in the tooth and have age-old problems? Do you work with individuals or the whole team? How does that work?
It's a blend of all. So I work with there seems to be two kind of audiences that I work with. It's kind of the people that are new to a leadership role and perhaps have had that role for about a year or two
Hmm.
and are still kind of finding their feet. And then there's folks that are leaders, have leadership experience, but have stepped into a new role, have stepped up a level, maybe have stepped into a different area of the business that they're not quite as comfortable in. Maybe
Yeah.
it's being part of an organization that's going through a digital transformation. So there's like bucket loads of change going on. So it seems to be those two kind of areas, newer leaders and experienced leaders who are stepping into a new space, a new role, a new level.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to the individuals and teams, I work with both. Um, I have to say it sometimes works best when we can do both of them together,
Hmm.
work with a leadership team and then have individual coaching sessions alongside that.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy both aspects.
Yeah. All right. That's good insight. Oliver pointed out that he's considering a leading position, but he's wondering about how to catch up and prepare. I guess how to get yourself into that leadership mindset.
Yeah, with coaching and developing people, it looks like,
Yeah.
which is I know at some point we're going to talk about the course that I've introduced and that I'm running. And that is I'll just a quick segue into
Yeah.
that. And that's based on this need that a lot of newer leaders and existing leaders who are maybe managing and leading different types of folks than they have in the past um, to help them understand what coaching is all about and
Yeah.
how to handle that common challenge that we see in product management today and in leadership of a concern of like, how do I help my people be the best they can be?
Yeah.
And how do I
Excellent.
do that without micromanaging?
Yeah.
So that's a common concern. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned this course. It's called Essential Coaching Skills for Product Leaders. Is that the sort of thing that Oliver and people in his position would take advantage of? And if so, tell
Yeah.
us about when that's running.
Right. So the course is Essential Coaching Skills for Product Leaders. I did a beta run of the course last autumn and it went really, really, really well. I got
Right.
great positive feedback. So I'm excited to bring it back again with a few tweaks, a few evolutions. It's running from March 19th through April 16th. So it's a 5-week short course. And we meet every week for 2 hours. There's a Slack community in between. There's some homework that you do in between. And I'd say one of the biggest benefits that past participants have mentioned is that within each of the sessions that we have, there's an opportunity to practice. So you
Hmm.
practice, we learn about a technique and we put it into practice.
Okay. So like role play, or how do you teach a leader things?
Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned, there is a little bit about explaining a coaching technique.
Yeah.
Maybe it's asking open-ended questions, which seems really simple, but there's a lot underneath that.
And
Um,
you know what? I can understand that that's tough. I've always struggled with that sort of concept when it comes to discovery questions, right?
right.
I always ask the leading questions. I always ask closed questions. I have to teach myself and hold myself back. And I know other people struggle with that too. So definitely a good one to teach.
Yeah, and it's directly related to I think kind of a fundamental takeaway from the course, which is in adopting a coaching mindset as a leader, you're really trying to make this massive mindset shift from being
Mhm.
really directive
Yeah.
in your leadership style, by telling people what to do and how to fix a problem and how to go about handling something to a non-directive approach and a coaching approach, which is where you're asking,
Yeah.
right? You're helping them figure it out for themselves and helping them equip themselves to develop and grow.
Which
So,
which can actually be a lot harder.
well, it's massive. It's really interesting because some of when I first started working on the content for the course last year, it didn't quite hit me initially, what was really going to be a major takeaway from this. And it is that you've got to make a fundamental shift in how you approach being a leader and the
Yeah.
conversations that you have with your team
Yeah.
members, and realize that a lot of it, when you are taking that directive approach and you're kind of telling versus asking and listening,
Yeah.
is something within you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that it's just based on your role models and what you've seen,
Yeah.
but it's also perhaps, you trying to be the hero and feeling
Yeah.
that leaders need to save the day. Leaders need to know how to handle everything.
And
So,
there's got to be some internal tension as well. I mean, the people who tend to aim for leadership roles, and this is generalization, but they tend to be the high performers, right? The ones who expect more of themselves and have been working their butt up to get up the ladder and impress people by doing stuff really well, right?
yeah,
When you get to a leadership position, what looks good for you doesn't mean doing everything. As a matter of fact, the best
right.
thing you can do is teach other people and get out of their way, right?
Yeah, it's that saying, what got you here won't get you there,
Yeah.
right? And it's really understanding that all of these great product skills that you've mastered and that you've like been a rock star at,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
have got probably done a lot to get you this promotion, aren't necessarily the skills. Well, they're not the skills you're going to need to continue to go up the ladder now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's this type of coaching that stops people from reaching that. What is? I think it's called Peter's principle. Somebody check me on that. Maybe I've got the name wrong, but it's the law or the principle or whatever you want to call it that states that people tend to get promoted to their level of incompetence. So you're
Right.
doing well, you get moved up. You're doing well, you get moved up, and then all of a sudden you're at a point where you're going, "I'm not getting this. I'm not doing well." But it becomes difficult to perform at that level because there's very few people above you to teach you and to show
Mhm.
you the way.
Right, exactly. It's a whole new world. It's a whole
Mm,
new skill set, and there's not a lot of opportunities out there to beyond coaching
yeah,
one-on-one to really learn what these different skill sets are.
yeah,
So in the coaching course, I introduce, as the title says, kind of some essential skills that you can bring into your leadership toolbox. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be every conversation you have going forward is going to be a coaching conversation.
yeah,
And it shouldn't,
yeah, yeah,
but it helps you to kind of understand what that is and to get more comfortable bringing it in when appropriate and when it's the right tool to use.
yeah. So in your coaching, when people come to you with problems, I mean, what kind of problems, what kind of stumbling blocks do people run into first?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of all over the place. But of course, there's some commonalities. A lot of times, it's adapting to change. A lot of coaching at its essence is about helping people, no matter what discipline they're in, no matter what area they're in, deal with change.
Yeah,
Maybe that's taking on a new role. Maybe that's bringing in a new team. Maybe that's an entire change way of working and as part of a transformation program.
yeah,
Um, it's, it's also being a leader and the change that comes with that,
yeah,
even when it comes to kind of receiving feedback, feedback at this level, at a leadership level, often feels different because it's not black and white, like you hit your target, you didn't hit your target,
yeah,
you did this great, you didn't do it great.
yeah.
It's often more personal,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, you saw me take a sharp intake of breath when you said receiving feedback. I'm like, oh God. It's tough, right? Because a lot of the feedback you start getting is around not whether you did your job, but whether you're doing your job well enough to help somebody else do their job.
Yeah. And what does
And
that really mean? And how do you
yeah.
help that person? Right. Like, and that's going to be different for every person that you're working with as well. So, there's a lot about uh, clients often are something at the beginning of an engagement might be about making decisions,
Yeah.
and feeling like these decisions that I'm making are so much bigger now. How do I know I'm right?
Yeah.
What if I don't make the right decision? So there's different approaches and different things we talk about with that. Dealing with really challenging conversations, with feedback, but also just in our regular day to day, we have tension and conflict all the time. I think
Yeah.
at the root of product management, we're built on tension and conflict with,
Yeah.
between the different members of our teams, within technology, design, product, that whole piece as well, and how we work together. So there's things like that. There's also, we've already kind of touched on this, the feeling that we have to know it all in order to be a good leader. And that makes us feel very isolated and very alone. So having somebody to talk to about those different emotions and how that story of leadership impacts us
Hmm.
and how we work and how our team then behaves as well. Those are all different things that come up with coaching.
Yeah, yeah. And so how does it change with managing your peers when you move into a more leadership role? So I mean, your VP product or CPO, what sort of tensions do you get with your CTO or with your COO and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's really important, no matter what your level and no matter who your stakeholders are, to remember we're all human,
Mm.
right? We've all been brought together in this awkward situation at times called an organization,
Yeah,
and we're all hopefully working towards the same thing, and we know what that vision or that mission is. But we all bring our own backstories, we all bring our own experiences. And I think if one of the first things that we talk about is trying to understand that stakeholder from a human perspective,
mm,
what might be their challenges? What are their things that really excite them and will help them? How can you be of service? How can you help that person as well?
yeah,
It's about building a relationship, just as it is, about building a relationship with the people on your team or with people outside of work, right?
yeah.
It's all based on a human element.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. And so what about that whole thing about being raised up to a certain level? You're no longer the person doing the work. You're the person helping people and coaching people and guiding people on how to do the work. I mean, do you run into people who have a sense of imposter syndrome because they're not in the weeds? Or does imposter syndrome go away when you get past a certain level?
Oh, I wish. I mean, wouldn't that be
That would
awesome?
be great,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, if you could just tick these 5 boxes, then imposter syndrome goes away.
Yeah, you've
No,
made it. You're a leader, so you don't have to
yeah,
worry about
exactly.
change.
You
Yeah.
know it all. And there's no argument about that. There's no conversation. Um,
Don't tell me it gets worse.
Yeah, well, in some ways, I think it does because, one of the things that we focus a lot on in coaching is building up your self-awareness,
Mm,
right? And for me, self-awareness means not only understanding you and your feelings and your emotions and your behaviors, but how they impact others.
mhm.
And I think sometimes we take that, especially as we're learning about that and growing that, we take that to heart, right?
Yeah,
And so we're really going to question ourselves at times. So I think imposter syndrome is so natural.
yeah.
I think I've written a few articles about it that you can find on my blog, but
We'll
I,
share those around for everybody afterwards.
yeah, that'd be great. But in one of them, I remember quoting, I think it's 70% or 80% of the population say they've had imposter syndrome at some time. And my big question is like, what about that other 20 or 30%? Like,
That's a good
what,
point.
what are they up to?
Yeah.
Um, so no, I think imposter syndrome comes up all the time, especially as I mentioned, a lot of coaching is helping people deal with change. And when
Mhm.
you're entering something new, be it a new role or working with a new team or a new area of the business, we don't, we don't we don't feel like we're as equipped to make those decisions, that we're not as confident in our skills and our knowledge because it's all new.
Yeah,
And that's a perfect place for imposter syndrome to step in,
yeah,
and for us to question our skills and our smarts and our presence. So yeah, imposter syndrome comes up a lot. Sometimes I wonder if it's almost too much, like if we've taken imposter syndrome to the nth degree.
mm,
And if there's really, one of the different things that we talk about in coaching when imposter syndrome when it does present, it comes up, is we try to break down the story behind it, right? What's really going on here?
mhm.
And how can we prove or disprove our beliefs are true,
Yeah.
that the story we're telling ourselves is true? Um, so yeah,
Okay,
it
yeah.
it's there, it's real,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's ever evolving.
And I wonder if there's a bit more tension on it, especially in this day and age when things have gotten more lean than they were a few years ago. Having to prove the value of
Yeah.
your role as a leader and your team's role. I mean, have you seen that play out in any way?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to a friend earlier today about the feeling that, and, I do work mostly with product people because that's my background. I
Yeah.
do work with some teams outside of product, but that really is my focus because that's my home, that's my tribe.
Hmm.
And I feel like us product folks have like this tendency to always feel like we must be doing something to prove ourselves, right? To
Yeah.
prove self-worth, to prove team worth, to prove product worth, whatever it might be. So, and now when we're in an environment where there's a lot of questions about ROI, that's gonna come up again and again and again. I think from a leadership perspective, our job and our challenge is to try to break that down
Mm.
again and be able to answer questions around it, but also to be able to realize that sometimes not acting is the biggest, boldest thing that we can do. Reframing a conversation around ROI,
Yeah.
helping to kind of take a different perspective on it. So it does come up, and it's hard to kind of identify one specific example because it comes up in so many different areas, really.
Yeah.
Um, but I think at the heart of it, the people that are asking about ROI are questioning themselves, right? Like they're questioning their own self-worth in some ways,
Yeah.
not to get too meta, but you know what I mean? Like, um, and trying to put the emphasis on breaking everything down into numbers that can be compared and contrasted with each other. I think kind of moves away from our whole movement and conversation and product around outcomes and working towards creating changes in behavior
Yeah.
versus focusing on output that might be more relative to specific ROI numbers and
That
conversations.
that's a really good point. And Greg's asked a question here in the chat. He said, "What's the greatest value that a leader can bring to a product team?" Like he said, leaders outside a product team seem to drive strategy and operations. So how can product leaders differentiate or add value?
How can product leaders differentiate?
From like the COO and the CTO who, their output is that they're building things or the company's still running. What's the product leader doing and how do they articulate that in terms of the value they're adding?
I mean, that's a massive question.
Yeah.
So I think one of the principles of the coaching that I do and the conversations that I have with leaders is very much around the idea of continuous improvement,
Yeah.
right? So it's breaking these big challenges into smaller things that we can experiment with and play with and feel okay about, no matter if they win or lose,
Hmm.
succeed or fail. So I think one of the biggest things product people can bring in these days is this idea of experimentation and curiosity,
Yeah.
which relates back to that, coaching skill we talked about just a little bit ago about asking questions versus telling. So I, and that really is something that I tout and kind of um, uh, continue to follow on with in my coaching sessions is like, well, how can we try it out? How can we prove or disprove something is real, something is not real? How can we figure out what is working for us, what is not working for us? And how can we build experiments around that to make a
Yeah.
change? How can we approach a really challenging conversation with a curiosity hat,
Yeah.
right? Versus like a telling.
I hear
Um,
that. Yeah. And actually what you're describing is the product person building in a product mindset or product culture for the team.
mhm.
And it's interesting that we call it product mindset or product
Yeah,
culture when really we mean a lean experimentation led culture. And yet it seems to be in the realm of product, which is
right.
fine. But the really key thing, I guess, is to make sure that the rest of the team is thinking this way. I often have people ask me, ProdPad seems like a great tool for product people, but, can the marketing team use it? Well,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Like you should have a product mindset for the marketing team, like an experimentation mindset.
Yeah.
And so I guess setting that stage for other teams to be able to work in this way and, be able to add value, not by just running out what they thought was a good idea, but actually planning experiments and checking hypotheses.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point because I think a lot of times, within product, we like to talk about all this stuff as we own it,
Yeah.
right? We own a product mindset, which is a lot of it is based on curiosity and experimentation and psychological safety, and feeling okay to fail and trust and all these great things. When in actuality, this is where the leadership development side comes in, I think, and why I can
Yeah.
sometimes work with people and groups outside of a product is because it's universal, right? In my
Yeah,
mind, it's almost more of like what a progressive organization these days should be working towards.
it's a really good point.
Um,
Yeah.
and we in product, I think in many ways have kind of led that. We've created that conversation. We talk about it all the time. We're trying to really extout it and like develop it, but it's not just us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so on that note, do you have to have come up through the product vein, the product ladder in order to become a product leader, or
Oh,
can you pull out product leaders from other areas of the business?
yeah, that is a great question. And that's something I work on quite a bit these days. It's like
Yeah.
this great ongoing debate. So, ideally, I think it'd be great if you could start with as an associate or a junior PM and
Mm.
work your way up. But it doesn't always happen that way. And especially in a lot of larger organizations that are going through transformations, who, maybe had a part of their organization that wasn't called product, but they kind of acted like it, right? So they feel they could just move it over, but maybe they'll be bringing people from marketing or business strategy or, who knows? Um, and they're giving them titles like head of product
Hmm.
or VP or above, and I think it can work as long as that person has a really good um, awareness to what the gaps are,
Yeah.
right? Which I think is hard because at that level, you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
And that's a challenge I'm constantly working through with clients actually. Um, and yeah, you have to be open to to understanding, to realizing that you're going to be learning in a new language in some ways.
Yeah.
I think ideally the people that are given those rules will have that mindset that we were just talking about, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing to bring to it. Ideally they'll know they'll know more about, experiments and what a culture of experimentation is really about. So you can find those people in different areas and organizations. I would almost consider those roles based on that type of profile versus kind of the versus who they know in the business or how they might be moved there otherwise,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So is it possible for for people from outside product to suddenly be product leaders? It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Um, I think the danger of it is when they are moved into that role and the people underneath them don't really know product either, and they're not hiring people who have product knowledge. I think that's one of the first things you need to do is you need to bring in some product
Yeah.
experience to the organization. You need to get yourself a good coach that can help you understand some of the skills that
Hmm.
are essential. Then maybe you also need an executive coach to help you through the changes, right?
Yeah.
But you need to be open to realizing that you don't know it all, and
Yeah.
you're going to be starting from scratch for a bit. And I really do think a first step in that situation is bringing in some real world product experience from the outside, be it through coaches
Hmm.
or through training or whatever it might be, or
Yeah.
hiring some good people into the organization that can help become kind of um, uh, bursts of expertise
Yeah.
throughout and help to create that product understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So how important is domain expertise when you're a leader
Uh,
of a company? I mean, could I go into a car sales company, or could I go into a finance company and run product there?
I've always, from a product consulting perspective, when I
Yeah.
did that, Um, absolutely. I mean, I worked in so many different types of organizations and industries. It's kind of crazy to look back on.
Mm.
Everything from aerospace to travel to finance to health to government, retail, you name it. So I think that's okay to do. Um, Pharmaceutical, the thing is once you're in it, there's often this view of like, if you don't understand that, if you're not a subject matter expert, you can't be here, you can't have
Yeah.
that position. So I think ideally what you're going to do is you're going to build a team that has balance, right? And it really depends on what that piece of the organization is aiming for.
Yeah.
What's their actual goal?
Yeah.
um
Absolutely.
so, and depending on that, you can build out, design your organization. Perhaps you need somebody with more product chops in one area, who could be matched with somebody who is really good in subject matter expertise, and they can learn from each other. But I think of it more holistically versus just one role. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Yeah, that's a good insight. And so somebody, anonymous here, has asked as to whether you ever recommend product leaders in order to progress in their career, to go up, to take on roles outside of product management to expand their perspective. And if
Mm,
so, any sort of roles that might help with that? Or do you recommend staying in the role and getting outside perspectives?
I think more experience in different areas is always great. I mean,
Yeah.
I've worked outside of product, I've coached outside of product. Like I said,
Yep.
there's a lot of commonalities. I think it depends on what you're looking to improve on. Are you looking to, is this more of specific, like I want to get better at tech? I want to learn
Mm.
how to do something in that space, or design or research or whatever it might be. Or is it wider than that? Um, Perhaps it's marketing, but I kind of I have a little bit of all of that experience as well. And I think it makes you a great holistic, um, at least I
Yeah.
hope, a better holistic leader.
It definitely does. I mean, product managers have always been the jack of all trades, master of none. And that's
Right.
often the strength, right? Is that you have, I like to call it like a sense of humor in line with, how to do development, how marketing works, how to understand how the fundamentals of the business finances work, but you don't have to be an expert in any of these
Right.
things, right? But
Yeah.
if you've had that outside experience, you can bring that in. And I guess it helps you better communicate with your fellow leaders, right? If you understand what's going on in the CTO's world or why the CEO is flipping out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It gives you a different perspective, which is always helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex asked a question. They said, can you talk around how to feel more comfortable with big decisions?
Mm. Yeah, I think decision making is tough. And as we talked about, as you move into that leadership role, or that level, it feels like the decisions you're making are really big, juicy ones. And in many ways, they are. So I think there's different tools that I bring up in coaching conversations. One of them, and behind the tools, it's to help us to understand kind of the magnitude of the decision, but also to realize most likely this isn't like a make or break decision,
Hmm.
a decision that there's no going back. So, Amazon, Jeff Bezos talks about the type one and type two decisions, which
Yeah.
is basically, can you go through, picture yourself at a restaurant, right? And there's that door that a waiter might go through that goes two ways, right? So he goes in and comes out. So is it a decision that you can make and then is reversible?
Hmm.
Or is it a type one decision where you're going one way and you're not coming back? So I also use a tool from the Gore-Tex organization
Oh, what's that?
it's called the water line.
Okay.
And it's quite similar. So when you like think of a boat, right? And think of the water line on the boat, if the decision that you're making is above the water line, it's not going to cause irreversible harm. The boat's not going to go down.
Hmm.
You know, make that decision with confidence and know that it's going to be okay. Maybe it's not the right decision, but you can learn from it and you can iterate and you can change and you can continue down your decision making path. If it feels like that decision is below the water line
Mm.
and it could cause irreparable harm,
Yeah.
then maybe that's a decision you need to talk to more people about. You need to get some advice. You need to get some guidance. You might need to do some more research around that. So the goal is to move, of course, anything below the water line to above the water line
Well, yeah.
when making a decision. But also, I'm pretty sure the research on this also shows that the vast majority of our decisions are above the water line.
Yes.
You
Yeah, I've
know,
I've I've heard this in relation to the Jeff Bezos reversible versus irreversible point
yeah,
one versus point two decisions. Most of our decisions are reversible.
right. And they feel really big. And
Yeah.
I totally get that. But in all actuality, this is one decision that could lead you to another decision that can lead you to another decision.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge or what we can talk about in coaching is not just, understanding that framework and trying to apply that, but what makes it feel so heavy?
Yeah.
What makes it feel like it is below the waterline?
Yeah. I,
And often, again, that relates to the stories that we're telling ourselves and the
yeah,
beliefs we have.
I like that waterline concept because it helps frame as to whether this is something you can make a quick call on or not a quick call.
Right. And it's also something that you can work with your team on as
Yep.
well, right? So when there's a common area of decision making, what's your water line,
Yeah.
right? So what can your team members go and make decisions on without you being involved,
Yeah.
right? Take away some of those micro decisions,
Yeah.
and where do they actually need more advice or guidance, and what's your process there?
Yeah.
So it's a great way to help build more empowered teams who are
Yeah.
comfortable making their own decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And another little tidbit on the decision making thing. I think I might have learned this from another webinar or something like that. I'd love to be able to attribute it, but somebody said the psychology behind decisions. If it looks as if you are at least mulling over the decision, putting some thought into it, rather than making a snap decision, people trust the answer more. And so
Oh,
something that you can
interesting.
do as a leader is if somebody asks you something, don't just say yes or no, but say, okay, good question. Here's what I'm thinking, right? It could be this,
Yeah.
could be that, and here's why.
Yeah.
Therefore, I choose that. And if you do that, you bring people along for the journey and they trust your decision and get on board with it more easily.
Yeah. Well, and also in that kind of situation, just ask your team member, what do you think?
Yeah.
Where are you leaning?
Yeah.
Turn that into a coaching conversation, actually.
What are my
Um,
options? Yeah.
what are your options? What are our options? How can you find out more? What's holding you back?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Um, I also have an art I've been writing for years now. So I also have an article about decision making on my blog. So we
Yeah.
can share that link as well.
Yeah, I've been watching The Diplomat on
Ah, it's a good one.
Netflix, and
Yeah.
there's a line. I haven't finished it. No spoilers, anybody.
No, no, no.
But there's a line in it where they talk about the president being there to just make 49-51 decisions, right? Anything that's like on the line right there. Anything beyond that, the team can make their own decision. And I thought about that, going, okay, well, what sort of tolerance do I have or does anybody else have in a leadership position? I often weigh in things that, are 70-30 or 80-20 rather than
Yeah.
almost 50-50. But I guess that waterline thing is bringing people to the point that they can actually solve more of their problems. You can make the decision without having to feel like it is this 50-50 thing that needs to go all the way up the ladder.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of owning the decision more as a
Mm,
team member and feeling
yeah.
good about that. Um, there's there's interesting decision, the science and art behind decision making is quite complex, actually. And
Hmm.
there's all these different there's decision science, which
Right.
is vast. And I've nerded out on it in the past. Um, but in, in one organization I worked with, they had three different types or levels of decision making, and the vast majority, they'd say basically like 80% of all decisions can be made with the waterline
Yeah.
example or tool. And then maybe about 15% of them might be something that is below that waterline and you need additional advice on, right?
Hmm.
So maybe you talk to different members of your teams, different stakeholders, your manager, whoever it might be, before you make a decision. And then maybe 5% of decisions that an organization makes are really more of these juicy, big decisions
Yeah, believe
that
that.
you bring in different types of tools and techniques. And one of the ones that we use that I'm not going to get too far into today, because I think will all blow our minds, was called integrated decision making. And it comes from like holacracy and that type of background. But it's a way to kind of bring in all different perspectives in order to make a decision that a group of people consent to. You're not going to reach consensus. You don't want consensus, but you do want consent.
Hmm.
So there's a lot within decision science in that space that I think is interesting to explore.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. That concept of consenting to. I mean, that sort of reminds me of something that I've seen our team and other teams use, which is something doesn't sit right, the ability to disagree but get on board with something,
Right.
right?
Disagree and commit,
But
right?
commit. Yeah, exactly. You're
Yeah.
not always going to get everyone saying, yes, this is absolutely the right thing. But if you have enough information, you're going to need people on the team to disagree, but commit to helping to see this experiment through.
Right.
How do you manage a team into that sort of mindset?
takes a lot of work, to be honest, to disagree and commit, or to consent versus, going for consensus. I think it takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of safety. It takes people feeling included,
Mm.
in the conversation. Um, in some ways, I think it does take people doing research and show that they've considered this and they
Mhm.
want people's input on it. Um, yeah, it doesn't happen overnight, but the organizations and the groups that I've worked with, and bringing that kind of mindset in and bringing those tools in, it takes a lot of practice, right?
Yeah.
Like most things do as we're learning. But once they get going, once they understand and put kind of a process behind it, it can start to happen more naturally.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen overnight for
No,
sure.
that's absolutely fair. And I'm just seeing a couple more questions coming in. If anybody has questions, get them into the Q&A. But Alex asked a question around how to manage upwards when other leaders don't know the basics about product.
Oh, it's tough, isn't it? It's frustrating. I totally
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah, I work with a lot of people who come to get ProdPad on board, and this is one of the things they struggle with is them trying to prove that a tool like this should exist and that they deserve to have tools, or this is how product works, and therefore let's get this on board for the rest of the team. So I can
Yeah.
imagine it being a universal problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to ask Alex what you've tried so far. But I
Classic coaching. Make sure you're
yeah,
asking the other
classic. I'd
questions
like
back.
to know what you've
Yeah,
tried.
yeah, absolutely.
So I think again, I'd start with the fact that it's a human talking to a human.
Hmm.
And try to understand their perspective, if there's a way. And I know this is super hard being a team member trying to influence somebody who might be up the ladder a bit further,
Yeah.
but try to understand what they know and what they don't know,
Mhm.
right? And it's kind of sometimes it's almost like it's a drip feeding process,
Mhm.
right? Um, and giving some information about, why this is important to you, what you think it might bring to the organization, how it can help fill a need. Um, and just kind of, again, it won't happen overnight, unfortunately. I wish it would, but to try to build a relationship with this stakeholder or manager that's based on, kind of the reality of the situation, why it's really important to kind of consider this and how they can learn more about it. Hopefully, we've talked about bringing in a head of product that has no product expertise or something like that,
Mhm.
or VP that has no product expertise. Hopefully, they've got that learner's mindset,
Yeah.
right? And they've got that growth mindset. And hopefully, they're going to be open to working with somebody who might have more product experience,
Mhm.
and you guys can kind of learn from each other. Doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah.
So I think it's a practice in patience
Yeah.
and perseverance, but also just trying to meet the person where they are, realizing this is the experience they have is going to help you in other ways. So how can you bring this to them in a way that is helpful,
Mhm.
that can help them move in a place in their understanding too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, they're just people. And a lot of
Yeah,
people look upwards to management and assume that management knows exactly what they're doing and why they're making decisions. And ultimately, they're just people. And I actually
right,
like to reframe this and think about these people as no different than your customers. They're just different types of stakeholders. And your customers aren't always on board with understanding why they want something a particular way or can articulate exactly why they're doing things, right? And so you do discovery, right? You
right.
you start figuring out what job they're trying to achieve and what problem they're trying to solve, and you ask the same questions or the same type of questions you do of your customers, but ask them upwards, ask them outwards, use them
Right.
internally as well to do that discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great approach. Bring
Uh,
curiosity into it.
yeah, exactly. I mean that trait that got you into product management is going to serve you well all the way up to the top of the rung.
Yep.
Um, and somebody's asked a question here around, do you have any thoughts on making a sideways move from being a product leader with lots of domain knowledge to moving to companies to learn a new industry to become a stronger product leader in the future?
Um,
I wonder if
do I
this is
have
the same as anonymous attendee who asked the same thing, the similar question earlier.
so, okay. So a product leader, Let me
Yeah.
just play this back to you, make sure I got it. A product leader who has a lot of experience in a certain area or industry and
Mhm.
might be thinking about moving to a completely different industry.
Yeah.
I would ask them what are their concerns. But basically, product, as we've talked about, from my experience, understanding some of the foundational or like fundamental aspects of product, and having that growth mindset and having that curiosity and understanding, the fundamentals of things like discovery and delivery and how to bring that all together can be transitioned into pretty much any organization. I think the challenge you're going to have is one, believing that yourself, and two, perhaps working with stakeholders who feel like you don't have the subject matter expertise, therefore you shouldn't be there or you shouldn't get hired.
Mm.
And I think that again is more about how you tell your own story,
Yeah.
right? And how you present yourself. But I think often that people that are hesitant to make that move are, and I don't mean to put this on the other person entirely, but just from my experience, like it's because there's something within us that doesn't feel confident about making that move.
Mhm.
Maybe we're concerned about, going into something completely new and unknown,
Yeah.
um, maybe not, maybe we're super excited about it and that's great, but I would try to unpack like what's the concerns that you're really having. Is
Yeah.
it concerns about yourself and your own performance? Is it concerns how other people are going to look at you
Mhm.
and how they're going to perceive you? Because I don't think the product skills are going to be the problem.
Yeah, I hear that. So, do you have any advice for folks who are looking down the barrel of either applying for a role that's inside the company or outside the company, or advocating for themselves upwards to get themselves into a product leadership role?
Um, I think it varies so much by every organization.
Yeah.
I think I really think a key thing to with leadership is knowing yourself and
Mm.
feeling comfortable and confident with yourself. And that comes across in how you make decisions, even being able to say like, I don't know, I'm going to think
Mhm.
about that. It comes across in how you communicate and work with your team members, your fellow team members, your peers at that point, how you try to grow relationships with stakeholders and with managers. So, but from my experience and my study and my practice, a lot of that just relates back to, who you are and
Yeah.
how you feel about what you do. So, I'm sure no matter what role you're looking to move into, there will be certain must-haves, right? We're kind of back to a job description with the must-haves and the nice
Yeah.
to haves. I'm sure there will be certain must-haves and boxes for you to tick, and that's always a good thing to do. But
Yeah.
I would also take time to think about, what can you offer in this new role? What is it about who you are and how you work with people
Mhm.
and your mindset to learning this new kind of leadership world
Yeah.
and what that's all about? Because I really think that's, as you're stepping into a leadership role, it is this different skill set, and how equipped are you and ready are you to kind of take that on?
Yeah, I love that thinking around, identifying what problem you can solve for the organization if you were to move up, right? If you were
Yeah.
senior, what change would you make? And you put some more tangible traits on this. You're more specific about it. But, I've often seen people who are ready to move up into leadership roles are often playing leaders in their own teams in the first place, right? And how they talk about their goals, their shared goals, how they own failure, how they coach other people
Yeah.
sideways. So these are all things that people can probably be doing now. And if you're doing this stuff, then maybe this is a sign that you will move into a product leadership role in a kind of a smooth way.
Yeah. In my mind, leadership's really about the impact you want to have in your team and your
Yeah.
organization and maybe even the wider world,
Yeah.
right? With your customers and
Yeah.
beyond. So, and it doesn't necessarily mean a certain level in an organization, right?
That's fair.
And it doesn't mean having a certain personality type.
Yeah.
It's, in my mind, it's more about who you are as a person and how you bring that every
Yeah.
day.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Kate. That's all the time we have for questions. Just to wrap up, folks, we are going to be having another webinar. It's going to be On March 12th, we're going to be talking about how to convert your timeline roadmap to the now, next, later, and how to get your team on board with that. So this is one of those more practical ones that well, you can put a feather in your cap talking about how you're going to be able to get people over to the now, next, later roadmap. And you will be leaving with a couple of these takeaways. We've got a course that you can use take home to use to learn how to do this, as well as a template that you can use, a presentation template that basically helps you sell now, next, later to the rest of your team who might be hanging on to the timeline roadmap format. So join us for that. That is March 12th, same time, same place. We have a further webinar planned, which is going to be March 27th, where we have Erin Weigel joining us. She's written a book on design, so we're going to be talking to her about decision-making at scale. So we're going to wrap up there. Couple other points. If anybody has any other suggestions of experts we should have on board, here's a selection of some of the few experts we've had over the years here. Who else should we invite? Who else needs to be in that the next webinar? So let us know. Send us an email or drop it into the chat now. And finally, should anybody be interested in trying out ProdPad yourself? As I said, we have a sandbox that you can try, which has a free version of ProdPad, which, editable and you can play with and you can share it around. But we also have demos of ProdPad. So one of our product experts there to show you around. So on that note, I want to say huge thank you to Kate. Everybody say thank you. Kate, thank you so much for joining us here today. And
My
thank you
pleasure.
all for your questions, for pitching in. Good to hear from you all. Good luck with your product leadership journeys. It sounded like some of you are right on the right path. So I'll definitely see you around and see you all at the next one.